Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. In today's show, I'm delighted to be joined by Blag Dahlia. Blag is best known as the founder of the American punk band The Dwarves. He's been performing and recording independent music for over 3 decades, and he's played over 1,000 shows all over the world, producing 23 LPs with an eclectic mix of artists for labels like Sympathy for the record industry, Epitaph, Sub Pop, Fat Records, Berg Records, and BYO. And I could go on. However, more recently, Blag has released a new album introducing Ralph Champagne, which I've been listening to intently over the last few days, which in a change of style moves towards Americana. The songs are easy listening, humorous, and tongue-in-cheek, but I have to say after listening to it, the quality in production and songwriting are amongst the top in the similar genre. On the Dwarves side, the Dwarves are set to release their new album, Dwarves Concept Album, in November, which coincides with the US tour. Hello and welcome to the show, Blag.
Hey, how you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good here in the UK, about 100 miles north of London, and you're over in the west coast of America, aren't you?
Yeah, San Francisco.
Lovely. We got this nice
ground zero of the insanity.
I was looking. You have actually toured over in the UK a few times, haven't you?
Oh yeah, I mean for years. I love it over there. I mean the food sucks and the money sucks and the hospitality sucks, but the people are the best in the world. I love England.
You gotta know where you're going for food. That's for sure.
Yes, the food is a disaster. They can't even get shit like an ice cube over there or fucking. It's crazy. I mean, yeah, like English hospitality is hilarious to me, but you know they do it with a sense of humor always. You know, like I love England because the people there are just funnier. You know, like the shit that they say is just funnier. The average person is funnier. You know.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, before we talk about the Dwarves and all the stuff coming up and Ralph Champagne, could you just tell a little bit about yourself and your journey into music from sort of when you were younger and how you got into it, please?
Yeah, I guess my family was kind of musical, you know. My dad had always loved music and listened to a lot of he liked the old standards, you know, stuff from the 20s, 30s, 40s. He was sort of a pre-rock and roll guy. You know, I was one of the last guys that grew up with like a pre-rock and roll dad. Like when Elvis came in, that was it for him, you know.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up with a lot of the old songs, and we would go to musicals and stuff like that, Guys and Dolls and the Music Man and stuff like that. And then my mom liked stuff like folk music and like acoustic guitar stuff, but she also liked just the hits of the day, like the Beatles or the Bee Gees or whatever. So then there was kind of some of that. And then when I was a little kid, you know, you'd listen to AM radio. Everything was on AM radio. It wasn't segregated yet. So you'd hear like a hit. You'd hear like Love Train by the OJs, and then you'd hear Crocodile Rock by Elton John. You know, it was all mixed together, you know. So that was kind of my early thing in music. And then by the time I was a teenager, I was very into like Frank Zappa, and my brother was like a jazz DJ. So it was very like sophisticated, you know, Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane and Roland Kirk. So I had a hugely eclectic music background, but I just wasn't that talented, you know. Then I heard the Ramones and my life changed, you know, and I said, oh shit, yeah, I can do that, you know. So then I got to be musical in a context that it would work for me. And I kind of discovered when I first went to high school, I moved to a new place. I hitchhiked to school, and a guy picked me up hitchhiking like, hey, you know, nobody hitchhikes around here. And I was like, oh, okay. And he took me to school and played me the Velvet Underground. And I'd never heard anything like it. And I was like, wow. And within a few months, you know, he taught me about like obscure 60s garage bands, like, you know, the Nuggets records and the Pebbles records and that kind of stuff. And, you know, bands like the Seeds and the Chocolate Watch Band, 13th Floor Elevator, you know, and then he showed me rockabilly, guys like Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent and all that, Elvis. And then we went to see Decline of Western Civilization, which was like the first kind of hardcore punk movie. So all in the space of a month or two, I kind of got my rock and roll education about like how rockabilly and 50s kind of takes you to the 60s garage shit, kind of takes you to the 70s punk shit. And then you kind of go from there, you know?
Yeah.
So, I guess that's sort of a catch-all history of me and my music.
That's very interesting, and I've been one of the things I'm always very fascinated with, and we had Stephen Blush on a couple of months ago, and he'd been over to the UK just at the tail end of the punk boom in the UK, which started probably about 75, late 74, early 75, with the Sex Pistols, and followed by the Clash and the Stranglers and lots of other stuff. But one thing I always found very fascinating, we in the UK, we're very, very into our punk and we love it. And we haven't really heard an awful lot about American punk, I don't think. There's a few, I would say in England, there are supporters, followers of American punk, but it tends to be a bit more underground. I can't, I mean, there were one or two DJs at the time, probably heard of him, John Peel in the UK, who played some of the more obscure stuff, but it's never been mainstream.
For John Peel to play us, unfortunately, you know, I mean, we got to go on the BBC a couple times, which was really fun, and we got played on there, and they used to play us on the Lockup show, but we were just a little too late. Peel never heard us or whatever, like us on.
Yeah, but from what I can gather, the punk scene in the US is still pretty powerful.
Well, okay, so there's a few ways of talking about this. I mean, first of all, to me, punk rock is just rock and roll. It's just speeded up rockabilly. I mean, it doesn't, you know, and then there's other forms of it that are kind of closer to heavy metal than they are to rock and roll and whatever. I'm an American chauvinist for sure. I mean, to me, it's like rock and roll is America first, and then you got England is a solid number two, and then everybody else is like whatever the fuck. You know, you get some interesting shit here and there from Japan or Italy or Germany or Sweden or Norway or whatever. But basically, if you're looking at the history of rock and roll, you're looking at America way in the forefront. And then, you know, you get the British invasion, bunch of great shit happens there. You know, English punk is interesting. I mean, I don't know. To me, ground zero of all that stuff is the Stooges, New York Dolls, Ramones, Dead Boys, Cramps, you know, so to me, it really is very much an American rock and roll phenomenon. But then you get this great reaction. Sex Pistols, I mean, their one record is an all-time classic. I love that record, but they were never able to make more than one. The Clash, you know, arguably a more complete kind of band. You know, they had a lot of stuff. I was never a huge Clash fan, but they went through a few different styles and did a few different things. So they interest me in that way. You know, I always liked The Damned and a few others, but honestly, you know, I have just the opposite view, I guess, of your standard British guy. You know, I'm very picky. You know, like to me, I'm interested in the top 5% of every different genre. You know, like I don't sit listening to jazz a lot, but if I do, then I'm listening to Kirk and Coltrane, and you know, I listen to a lot of every like I'm not one of those people who takes a deep dive into punk rock and loves every punk rock record. I make punk rock records for a living, so my take on it is like I'm interested in the top 2-3% of punk records.
Yeah,
the rest I don't want to hear it.
No, and no, I can understand that totally. I mean, I know when I was brought up in the 70s, because I was a 70s lad, we had the sort of glam rock in the early 70s, T-Rex, Bowie, and all the rest of it. And then we had all the Genesis and Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, which you know, was good. And then I think it got a bit staid and boring, should we say? And you're quite right. A lot of the English punk bands were influenced by bands like the New York Dolls, etc., and the Ramones and all the rest of it. But it was a good time in music in the UK. That's for sure.
It seemed like that was a good scene, Oi and all that stuff for the people who were there. But as a listener who wasn't there, there's nothing that I'm that interested in from that scene. Like I want to sit around and crank my Peter and the Test Tube Babies record. You know, I mean, I'm sure it was interesting to see back then, but
Yeah. The Tubes were an American band, weren't they?
Yeah.
Because that was another band that the Brits got quite into. White punks on dope.
Weird kind of, proto-punk glam kind of weird. And kind of at an Alice Cooper quality and stuff. But yeah, with the Dwarves, I mean, we basically, we started out as a 60s garage band, just very influenced by the Seeds and the Chocolate Watch Band and that kind of stuff. And that's what our earliest record, Horror Stories, is. And before that, we made an EP as The Suburban Nightmare. And that's what that kind of stuff is, very 60s. And then, when we moved to California, we kind of made a switch into a more hardcore vibe. And that was records like Toolin' for a Warm Teabag and Lucifer's Crank. And, those records that became like the early, very primitive form of the Dwarves. And then the first time people really heard us in any numbers was when we made Blood, Guts, and Pussy, which was a very kind of basic hardcore kind of record, very unadorned, kind of very Misfits influenced. And that was sort of when we first came to people's attention, So I don't think people really knew that we'd started as a 60s garage band or that we had, percussion and background vocals and all that kind of stuff. That by the time you got to Blood, Guts, there was none of that. It was just zero, straight ahead, fucking very primitive, straight ahead rock and roll, and then I've kind of spent the years since then evolving again. We kind of devolved to Blood, Guts, and Pussy. By the end of the 90s or the middle of the 90s, we'd kind of evolved to a sort of pop punk sound, which was, encapsulated in like The Dwarves Are Young and Good Looking, which turned out to be kind of our most popular record, which sounded more like around the edges, like the Green Day and Offspring bands that were getting very, and so that again was when American punk kind of made its comeback.
Yes.
In the Offspring and Rancid and NoFX and those bands. And the Dwarves that were always kind of considered sort of an intermediate tier of that 90s scene, But to me, my influences were the kind of the generation before.
Yeah. Was there a conscious decision to become more commercial at the end of the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about more commercial. In my mind, it was becoming more listenable. I went back, listened to my records, and I'm like, okay, this is a cool artifact, but I don't really enjoy listening to it. Like I knew why my earliest records were interesting and why collectors might want them. But until we made Young and Good Looking, I didn't really feel like we had a record that was like ear candy that you could listen to, that was like enjoyable. And so once I hit that, it was kind of an itch I wanted to scratch. And so since that time, really, since Young and Good Looking, Come Clean, and that era, late 90s, early 2000s, really the Dwarves went to kind of a very eclectic bag where it was like, okay, here's a hardcore song and we want it to be good hardcore. Now here's kind of a garage song. We want it to be good garage. Now here's a real pop punk kind of song. We want it to be, just like you're listening to Blink or Green Day. It was like I kind of aspired to, because I watched all these bands, even the ones that got very popular, and they would just have one style, and then it was like, here's the best version of our one style. And every song got progressively worse till the record was over, and for me, wanted to make more like an Abbey Road record or something with a lot of peaks and valleys and goes here and goes there. Maybe it starts out hardcore, but then it gets much more pop and then it goes to some weird noisescape, so it was like, that's kind of what the Dwarves have been aspiring to now for a long time. And I think it costs us a lot of fans because just when somebody was like, oh, I kind of like this Dwarf song, it's like, what? They tried to do a hip hop thing? Like, fuck those guys, would sort of always be like, oh no, I don't like them anymore. And it's like, you probably still do like some of what we're doing on this record. If you're a pop guy, there's something for you on every Dwarves record. If you're a hardcore person, there's something for you on every Dwarves record. If you're just a straight up mid-tempo rock and roll fan, there's probably some good stuff on every Dwarves record. It's just a question of, can your brain handle all of those things on one record? And then with this newest record that we got that's coming out in November, it's called the Dwarves Concept Album, and you got some fucking heavy hitters on there. I mean, Nick Oliveri playing bass, from the Mondo Generator and Caius and the Queens, all that kind of stuff. And then you got Josh Freese, who's now in the Foo Fighters, but who played with everybody, Devo and Replacements and all these groups. He plays drums on it, and then our drummer, who's like a younger thrash guy named Snoopak, he's on there. All these different genres, all these old members, guys like Saltpeter, who helped me start the band back in high school. He comes back in with songs and vocals. So it's very eclectic, I think, in a way that most hardcore isn't. And so it like most hardcore fans, just it blows up their brain. They don't want to like hear every different genre in a record. But for me, it's like that's the only thing that's enjoyable. Like I don't want to do the same thing over and over.
Hi, it's Bob here. Just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode. And if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 80 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics, which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. And the nucleus of the Dwarves is you, really, isn't it, Blag? You are the Dwarves with other people, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I tried when the Dwarves broke up in the early 90s, I tried doing a solo act, and it basically just sounded like the Dwarves and was my same friends. And so at a certain point, I realized that I really was a band guy, and it had to be a band. Yeah. People wanted that input. And of course, the other thing with the Dwarves that I think a lot of people don't know is that even though I am the nucleus of it and I kind of tie it together and produce it, everybody in the Dwarves can write songs and really well. I mean, Nick Oliveri's written a whole career of his own worth of songs, and then, Mark Diamond, the Fresh Prince of Darkness, he's been in a bunch of bands, written a bunch of Dwarves songs. Saltpeter comes back and writes songs, He Who Cannot Be Named always contributed songs. So everybody was a songwriter and a lyricist, and so I think it makes for a more interesting band, again, as opposed to usually it's like, well, this guy's the nucleus of it, so he wrote all the songs.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, everything sounds the same, so I'm really gratified that the Dwarves are a bunch of talented guys and they were all songwriters. But yeah, I mean, I'm sort of the nucleus of it, where it ties back to the production. And our production style is like veers between hardcore punk, pop punk, 60s garage, and thrash metal. And those are sort of the places where we go. Yeah. And then it's just a question of where we go within that,
No, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing that, actually. I've been listening to quite a lot of your stuff recently prior to this interview. And then, of course, something that I've really been enjoying, Ralph Champagne, which is, if I can describe you'll be able to describe it probably better than me, but from myself as an Englishman listening to it, it sounds very American. It sounds as though it's up there with everybody else doing that type of music, but the humour in it is fantastic. One particular one about... the guy goes out with your old girlfriend, which absolutely hilarious. Tell us how Ralph Champagne came about.
Girlfriend is what that one's called.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I've always been very eclectic in my musical taste. So I was telling you about all the different hard genres that the Dwarves do, but then I thought, well, I want to make some solo stuff that isn't just sounding like the Dwarves. So what can I do? So I've made these various projects. An early one was called Penetration Moon, where it was just like, let's do a 70s glam band. So we did like our version of a glam band. Or I had a thing called Candy Now, where I sang with this Russian female singer, Lena Moisov, and played with some multi-instrumentalists. And it was like, oh, cool. What happens when we go for the softer genres and it's more maybe country-ish or acoustic guitar-based music or Americana, as you say, that type of thing. So that kind of started with that Candy Now record. And, at a certain point, I got in with a guy named Andy Carpenter, who I thought was a really brilliant producer. And I started thinking more in terms of, hey, could you just take my songwriting, which tends to be very straightforward and kind of rockabilly country based, and then arrange these songs in a different way so that they don't just come off like, some of it, like on the Ralph Champagne record, there is a real country influence that's in there. But it's also, as you say, it kind of, the same way the Dwarves go to every hard genre, Ralph Champagne kind of goes to every soft genre. Like, here's a little country, here's a little like female male pop duet, here's a little bit of acoustic guitar stuff, here's a little bit of like bluegrass, countryish kind of stuff, here's some kind of yacht rock, like songs like It's Over or Nothing to Say are very kind of soft yacht rock, piano based. So yeah, it was very like, that record was super eclectic, and it was a good example of a pandemic record, although we didn't think of it that way. But in January of 2020, I went to Andy Carpenter and I said, okay, man, I'm going to play you like 30 songs on acoustic guitar, and I want you to help me figure out what tempo these go in and what key these songs should be in and which are the ones to focus on. And so we wound up winnowing it down to the Ralph Champagne record. And it like, it started as just vocals, finished vocals and guitar, because that was all you could do during the pandemic. It was just me and him kind of standing apart and doing shit. So then when finally things opened a little bit, I took that record to Josh Freese and said, okay, make this sound like a record, play drums behind this pre-existing vocal, which usually, you start with drums and rhythm section and then you sing over it. But in this case, it was pandemic, so everything was kind of opposite. But that turned out to be a cool way to approach it.
Sorry to interrupt. So it's those original vocals on the album, is it?
Yeah. So the Josh was done putting drums on it, it's like, okay, this sounds more like a record. Then a guy named Tom Ayers came in, who's a great like multi-instrumentalist guy from Oakland who I've known for years. And he's the kind of guy, he's like always the most talented guy in the room, so it's just like, play some bass on this, play some guitar on that, blow a trumpet on this. I mean, he just can do everything.
Yeah.
And so that was when it started to feel like, oh, wow, we can kind of freak out the genres of this. In other words, it doesn't just have to be limited by my guitar playing and that kind of, everything I do and write kind of comes from a rockabilly aspect or country aspect. And then you turn it into hardcore, you turn it into whatever. But once I started handing it over to Tom Ayers and Andy Carpenter, these new genres would emerge. It was like, wow, now this sounds like Brazilian, or wow, this sounds like yacht rock now. This is strange, So I got to kind of be surprised by the music for the first time. With the Dwarves, I kind of know what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the guys do something cool, they're like surprising me in ways that I understand. But with Ralph Champagne, it was like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is just.
Would you, in effect, sort of take a Dwarves song and turn it into a Ralph Champagne song?
Yeah, I want to do that with a few them actually. Now, because now that I see how it works, it's like, okay, as long as we have the kernel of a song, you can do anything with this.
Yeah, it's like some of these dance songs you get, isn't it? They take an old song and then you suddenly turn it into a dance song, and providing it's a good song, it stands the test of time and it can be molded into something else.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean. On the Ralph Champagne record, we have, sort of the trucker anthem, which is called Con. And then my friends, the Mad Twins, who are these animators from the Ukraine, made this amazing video to go with that. I would suggest anybody to look at it. Just look up Blag Dahlia Contraband on YouTube, and this amazing animated video will come up. But yeah, that was kind of the, my attempt to make a song like Convoy or Eastbound Down. That was very trucker influenced. Yeah. And it was done. Andy Carpenter turned around and said, "Oh, we could make a country trap version of this." And so he just stripped everything away, and all of a sudden it was a dance song. And I was like, "Holy shit! This is like a dance song with this vocal on it." Yeah,
that's the last song on the album, isn't it? The remix of Contraband.
Yeah, the remix of Contraband. So that's kind of been a lot of fun, and for me, trying not to be such a control guy like I am with the Dwarves records, and letting it have more space and letting other people kind of figure out what the thrust of it is once I've written the song, So that's kind of interesting. And now we're working on new Ralph Champagne material.
I was going to ask about that. So you got a new one coming out with Ralph Champagne?
I mean, I just got together with Tom Ayers, and he surprises me every time. I had a song called "Can't We Just Cuddle," which was just about like people now who are taking too many pills and they can't fuck anymore, and they're just like, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of wrote it. I'm more limited, so I just write it with like acoustic guitar chords. Then I get this thing back from Tom, and he's made it sound like a weird elevator in Brazil, and I'm like, all right, I get.
Yeah.
Suddenly that he's very good at taking my lyrics and making the music fit it more appropriately. And Andy Carpenter is very good at that, so I've kind of realized that songwriting is separate from arranging and production. And I mean, I always knew that intellectually, but now I'm really feeling it viscerally. You bring in a song and then people change it completely. And you're like, fuck, this is cool,
Yeah, it's all about collaboration, I guess, isn't it? And we'll talk about the new tour, the tour of the Dwarves coming up in November. But is Ralph Champagne going to go on tour?
Oh man, I want to so badly, but I think what I want to avoid is just having a band, because first of all, you're going to throw together a band and then your drum's going to sound like Josh Freese. I don't think so. You think you're going to throw together a band and your bass playing and guitar is going to be like Tom Ayers. I don't think so. So what I want to do with Ralph Champagne is just get a couple good singers, hopefully a female singer and a male singer, and we'll just front it with the music canned in the background, just play the instrumentals, and then we kind of perform it and make it more like a review or like a comedy with like, showing videos in the background and whatever. Like I want to do Ralph Champagne live, but I want to kind of do it in an interesting way that isn't just like a band, and I haven't quite found a way to do it yet, but I'm gonna find that.
So what's Ralph Champagne gonna wear then?
Oh, he wears like tacky suits and stuff. I had to was one of the, I don't know if you watched any of the videos, but one of them I have like a velvet suit. One of them I have like a Hugh Hefner pimp robe, like Ralph Champagne's kind of a rakish guy, so he's got a decent outfit on and he's kind of an old pervert, that kind of
shirt with a few buttons undone at the top, I guess.
Right. You could have that. Although, my chest hair is going tacky and kind of 70s, 80s, I think fits Ralph Champagne.
So tell us about the tour coming up with Dwarves.
Well, we kind of tour in spurts. So right now, we got 4 shows with Bad Religion, who of course are a, legendary punk band from California. So it's always fun to do shows like that where, it's going to be packed and it's going to be punk fans and you make some new fans there, We're doing the Punk in the Park Festival in November, which is in Orange County. And then in November, we're going out with a Midwest punk band called Direct Hit, doing a bunch of shows with them. We're playing some shows with Zeke at the end of the year. And we just announced New Year's Eve with Pussy Riot in San Francisco. Right. Just be hilarious. It's like Dwarves with these feminist icons. So it's, I like to keep them guessing and keep doing interesting stuff, live.
Have you got any plans to cross the sea and come over to the UK?
Yes. I mean, we really want to do it. And I hope we get to the Rebellion Festival for 2024. I love playing that festival and then spinning shows off that. So we got to look into that. We did do Europe this year. We did about a week and a half. But we didn't make it to the UK. So we got to get back there. I love my London shows, my Manchester shows, my we get up north to Edinburgh and Glasgow and Glasgow, I should say. Yeah. But I mean, I love it over there. Again, if you can handle the hospitality, England is a great place to be, and great music fans there. I wish they paid us a little more over there, but fuck, whatever.
So, you're obviously on the subject of your creativity. You're also an author, aren't you?
Yes, I wrote a couple books, and my old books have now been reprinted, and my newest one just came out through a press in LA called Rare Bird. So I write these kind of transgressive, dirty novels with kind of a female lead character named Nina. And I just wrote Nina came out around 2009, and then I just wrote the follow-up called Highland Falls, and that just came out last year. And I also had done a book that was more like experimental fiction, kind of weird William Burroughs kind of thing, that was illustrated by Mad Mark Rood. Yeah. That came out in the late 90s. And of course, Rood is no longer with us, but it's a great kind of weird illustrated book. And my words are all just all over the place. It's very kind of unreadably weird, but it's a fun book called Armed to the Teeth with Lipstick. So yeah, but I write kind of minimalistic novels now, and they're kind of straightforward, but very funny and kind of cruel. There's a cruel my writing,
Yeah. Have you got any? I mean, I mentioned earlier on about some of the film stuff that you did, but you also done SpongeBob as well, haven't you?
Yeah, in the first season of SpongeBob, Saltpeter, who was my good friend, wrote a lot of those SpongeBob songs. And so they wrote one called Do the Sponge, and they wanted it to kind of sound like the Cramps. I said, well, I can do that. And this was before anybody knew SpongeBob. It had no budget. They couldn't go out and hire people to do a bunch of shit. So I just went in for cheap and, knocked out a vocal. And yeah, 8-year-olds will always love me for singing Do the Sponge on SpongeBob.
Yeah. And what have you got any other projects coming up?
Oh, man. I mean, we were so busy. I mean, this Dwarves record, there's 20 songs on the concept album, and It's just all over the place. But there was even another, 10 songs left over. So we're going to have another EP in about a year. The other thing is, we went and reacquired all the old Dwarves records. And there's a whole live in the studio version of what came to be Blood, Guts, and Pussy.
Oh, right.
Completely different version where I'm singing live in the studio. And so got together, we mixed that, and it came out really cool. And I thought, wow, what if we went back to Michael Levine, who took the photos for Blood, Guts, and Pussy, and got a bunch of the other photos from that thing. And then we went back to Charles Peterson, who took the live photos for Blood, Guts, and we got a bunch of other things from there. And so we're going to make like a parallel Blood, Guts record that's different. It's like a whole different version that was recorded live in the studio and using pictures from that same iconic, cover, Guts and Pussy, probably the most famous cover I ever did. Yeah. And so we're going to kind of reconstitute it with the whole different version of audio, a whole different version of the pictures, and then I'm gonna kind of tell the story of it. So I'm very excited about that. There's some cool Dwarf stuff coming up, both for like old completists who only like the old stuff, and for people who are a little more eclectic and modern and like our new stuff. So it's all kinds.
Plenty coming up. Yeah, well, it certainly sounds as though you're very busy. What sort of music are you listening to at the moment?
Wow, I have this conversation with people all the time. So I don't really listen to music unless, like I'm in the car and then I just turn it on and see, well, what's on the country station or what's on the pop station, or if I'm driving in a big city, then it's like, oh, what's on the weird college station? Maybe I'll hear something weird. So I hear new stuff all the time. I just don't really know what it is.
No.
I don't really like go back and listen to old records. Like a lot of my friends, it's like they love the Stones, so they still listen to a Stones record and shit. Like if a Stones record comes on, I'm happy.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to put it on. It's like I already heard that. So
they've got a new one just about to be released, haven't they?
Is that right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Which should be good. And one final sort of question I've got really is if there's anybody listening and they like their music and they'd like to enter the music industry, what advice would you give them?
Don't.
Do you know what? Every musician says that initially.
I guess what I would say is like, because the music industry now is very much like, oh, I'm a singer, I'll try and go on a TV show and maybe I'll be famous, What I would say is like, avoid the industry and just get together with your friends and make something interesting. Get together with the people who are around you and make something interesting. And then the industry will sort of find you from there. I think now what I feel sorry for young people is that they get all kinds of advice about marketing and all kinds of advice about how to succeed or achieve before they've actually built up any kind of talent, any kind of style, anything interesting. It's like, don't just imitate somebody else, like come up with something homemade and interesting and then worry about marketing it and selling it. And, but until then, just make music and just be interesting and try and see if you can do that, you know?
Well, this has been a really great conversation, Blag. Where can people find out more about the Dwarves and Ralph Champagne?
Go to thedwarves.com, pick up all our shit.
My guest today has been Blag Dahlia. Blag is the founder of the American punk band, the Dwarves, and links to all things Dwarves are on the show notes. Thank you for being a great guest on the show, Blag.
Great talking to you, my friend. Thanks for your interest in the Dwarves.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.